All right, let's get started. Good morning, everybody, and thank you all very much for joining us here today to talk about content syndication challenges and opportunities here, there, everywhere. We'll spend a bit of time talking about content syndication and explore sort of the current state from various perspectives, but also really talk about how we imagine the future is going to look like and how different paradigms of discovery and access, how that works together with content syndication. So my name is Hielke Koers. I'm the Chief Information Officer for STM Solutions, and I'm also the Program Director for Seamless Access and Get FTR. And I'll speak a little bit more about what those initiatives are and how they are relevant for content syndication and discovery and access of content today, and also how we see that evolve into the future. But before I talk about those facets, I'd like to invite Judd to come to the stage and kick us off with his perspectives from Elsevier. Judd.
Thanks, Hielke. My name is Judson Dunham. Is that really loud? Is it reasonable? Yeah. I am a Senior Director of Product Management at Elsevier, and I primarily am working on Science Direct. Before I dive into that, it's funny, when we got together to make this program, I thought it was interesting that I was up on a similar stage 4 years ago here talking about content syndication. We had started a program of work at Elsevier to open up Science Direct, which is of course Elsevier's full-text journal book platform, to other publishers. And so we were very excited to be here with colleagues from Wiley and ACS, among other publishers. And we worked together with them, and we're up to, I think, 30 publishers now with about 500,000 journal articles from those 30 publishers hosted on Science Direct. And at the time, it felt like a very important kind of a momentous piece of work because if you remember, ResearchGate was doing similar things. It felt like the world was opening up a little bit and that we could work together as publishers and vendors to help bring content to people with fewer boundaries and fewer obstacles. And that was really sort of the joint mission that we had with the publishers that we were working with. Is the idea is fewer clicks to content. If you can bring the content to where the user is, you can aid discovery, everybody wins. And I think that we still have the same opportunities, but we have a new, I think, challenge ahead of us, and where my head is at most of the time these days, of course, and I apologize we didn't put AI in the session title. If you were really hoping to avoid an AI session, I apologize that you've come to the wrong place. But I think that what I look at content syndication challenge now, as if we are moving to a world, as many people think we are, where increasingly the reader of content is going to be a large language model of some sort, whether that's one of the main models like ChatGPT or Anthropic or other sort of LLM wrappers, tools like Scopus AI or Science Direct AI, that content syndication takes on a new kind of meaning and a new importance. And I put some questions on here. If the reader is a large language model, does where they access the content, does that become somewhat irrelevant? We knew that from our content syndication experience with Science Direct, that Science Direct itself being a trusted platform that many, many customers were familiar with, that users are very familiar with, that there was a benefit from the human side of things for content being on Science Direct. But if the large language model doesn't pay attention to those things, does where the content is hosted become irrelevant? And then secondarily, for content syndication on Science Direct, we weren't hosting PDFs, but we had Get FTR as a facilitator to get humans to the endpoint of the PDF. But the challenge that we had to face was just bringing content in and getting it set up and hosted for the website. But with large language models, potentially there are new challenges that we have to face to prep content for consumption in that way. So the frame that I look at it as is we have, content syndication is still relevant because human use is still very important today. But the yesterday-today view is getting content to where people are and figuring out if you're succeeding by measuring downloads. But maybe the content syndication challenge of tomorrow is bringing context, not even necessarily PDFs or documents, to large language models. And how are we going to measure that? Through something other probably than counter-type downloads, maybe measuring tokens. So we're looking at this a lot within Elsevier. We are continuing to work with other publishers. We're deep in many discussions with many publishers about how to bring other publisher content into some of the AI tools we're building. And we see that the challenges are different. We can't just say, let's go out and get the PDFs and the job's done. What we really need in terms of the content is more like objects. We need to bring content in and we need to prep it and kind of like chunk it up and get it ready for use by large language models in responsible ways. And that means things like sections of documents and tables and data, maybe sectioning out methods, but always preserving the same rich provenance that we are always focused on when we are doing content syndication in the traditional way. In terms of delivery, again, it's, previously it was bringing in XML, putting it through the same content pipelines, putting it on a web page. Now it's, doing vector embeddings, building knowledge graphs, things like that. There are different challenges that we have to solve for on the technology side in order to make it ready for this type of use. And then, of course, the use itself. It used to be put up a web page, somebody finds it in Science Direct, or somebody gets recommended an article, they see the document, they download it. The use in large language model world is very different. Retrieval augmented generation, potentially making it available to agents, both internal and external, maybe notebooks. Instead of pulling documents, maybe it's pulling chunks of documents or snippets. So it's just a very different world and lots of new technical challenges to solve. And it's important to note that we believe, and I think most people working on this believe, that it's not that we're going to replace human use with large language models, but the human use becomes more of an endpoint. That if a large language model assisted research workflow is consuming content and presenting synthesis to users, but the user still always needs to be able to get back to the original document. So another way of looking at this is that with traditional content syndication that we were doing before, we were looking to optimize for human use. And that involved, in the Science Direct example at least, a number of sort of challenges to solve, like, for example, SEO. Science Direct is a very successful platform because we've mastered how to get ourselves indexed very well in Google and Google Scholar and other things like that through things like performance. So, optimizing for human use is a set of activities that are, traditional and pretty well known, but optimizing for machine use presents both new challenges as well as new opportunities. So data normalization is a big challenge that we're running into, where we try to pull in content from different places. We have to get it set up so the large language model knows how to navigate it. Connectivity, you can make a lot more use of connecting metadata and content and building things like knowledge graphs. These are things that have had a lot of promise and discovery for many years, but they're not really used that much consciously by humans, but large language models can make great use of them. And of course, data enrichment. So I think the implications for both of these are, I look at the content syndication world previously as, we were doing a lot of optimizations that kind of maybe looked like growth hacks. It was just a way of kind of getting the most out of it, but it wasn't really adding a lot of value. Whereas what we see with large language models is the more effort and energy we put into data normalization, connectivity, and enrichment, the better the results are for the user. We can really add meaningful informational value over and above the PDF. So that makes it very exciting for us. I have one last slide and then I'll turn it over to Brian. So the title of the slide is a bit provocative. Of course, it doesn't change everything. But it is going to change. I think if you believe that in 2, 3, 5 years, a large amount of use of content like what Elsevier publishes is going to be consumed by large language models on behalf of readers through systems like this, then things are definitely going to change. It's going to take more than today's APIs and websites. We're going to have to build new knowledge infrastructures to support that. We probably are going to need new measures of usage and value. Is it going to be counter downloads? I don't think so. I think it will be something like that. But we're going to have to find new ways of communicating with our customers and other stakeholders. How is their content being used? What's the value of it in systems like this? And we might even need new models of attribution and citation, by which I mean if you've interacted with a summary from a large language model, especially like a deep research, a lot of content's used in the background to generate that, and it's not always cited in the end. Do we need to retain some kind of attribution for that kind of background knowledge in new ways? So there's a lot to do, and I'm really happy to be in product development this time and have the honor to attempt to be solving these things. I hope that you guys got something out of this set of slides, and I'd love to discuss it later. But first, over to Brian.
So my name is Brian Gray. I'm the Associate Dean of Collections at University of Cincinnati, and I've just been there just a week or two past 1 year. Previously to that, I was at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio, where I oversaw collection strategies. My view today will come from the academic library perspective, my interactions with OhioLink, which is our state consortium. I'm on their collection committee, and I've been also on various vendor, publisher, advisory boards. So this is sort of a combination of things I've seen across those experiences. And I've narrowed it down to like 4 categories of things that will sort of describe where we've came through with content syndication, where we're at, and why some of the slides Justin was talking about, where we're going. So some of the things that are still to be solved when it comes to content syndication. The first one is looking at it from, well, I'm looking at several perspectives. So the perspective could be from the librarian that's helping with reference or research consultation. It could be the user experience. I'm thinking also of the acquisitions librarian or the resource librarian that's managing access to content. I'm thinking about working with my data analyst to prepare reports and dashboards to prepare my library administration for budget conversations or university administrators. So those are sort of the buckets I pull together for these categories. But the first one's more the user discovery experience. And for each slide, I broke it down to pros, cons. I'm not putting any weight to them. Some of these are very minimal. Some of these things were bigger issue early on with content syndication, and we see less of it. But there's different flavors of these out there depending on the type of institution or the vendor or publisher that's running content syndication. So I want to bring them all together for us to have as a backdrop in these conversations. But first, in the user discovery experience, there's several things that happen with content syndication. First, from a user perspective, they're just all the content's in one place. They're not having to go out and find it. It's all coming together. Things like that. They don't even know it's coming from the library probably, but in the end, the user's having a positive experience because they're finding the content. It's also they're being exposed to a lot of different content they weren't expecting when they went to that tool or platform that's syndicating this content. And in that sense, it's opening up their eyes to different things they weren't thinking about when they were doing their searches and stuff. But it creates a lot of challenges these users click through to this content because it's coming from a lot of different places. It maybe is on a platform they're not used to. So we often struggle. We often find challenges with authentication where a user will click down through a couple clicks and all of a sudden they're not getting access to something they thought. Or they get down and they follow through the pathway to the syndicated information and they can't get back to where they were originally. So there's some real challenges there sometimes. They might get into an accidental paywall situation, which is the same thing. They don't have the access or get off in a different pathway with advertisements or something along that. There's something that the librarians are always concerned about with consolidated platforms or syndication is users might be using the platform for their discipline that doesn't have the functionality that they would need within their discipline. So once they find this platform that has all the syndicated content, they might lose some critical functionality that within their discipline that it's on their primary platform of research. But now that they're searching on this new platform or this new web presence, they lose some of that functionality. We also find a lot of inconsistent usage data and metadata in this model because the content's being syndicated from a lot of different places by that publisher or vendor. It could be very inconsistent for the user. It could be very different than what their experience is within their discipline. So it could be a little confusing. It might lead to false paths as they're clicking through the results, things like that. The other challenge that comes up a lot is just content not always being available. So if you're working directly with the faculty member or the student, they've got to this mode where if they find something, even if they know they're going to use that article or chapter consistently, they don't save them anymore, they don't bookmark them, they just constantly jump into the search engine and they find it again and again and again. And then all of a sudden it disappears and it's the university's fault or the library's fault that that content no longer available on the platform that was syndicating something, so it wasn't really part of that platform anyways, but it falls to the library because we took it away from them. So that happens all the time. We constantly hear it from our users and our researchers, and it's a side effect of how they do their research now and how they access information, where they're not keeping a folder of all these files, they're not keeping, using citation managers to gather links or whatever. It's just quick to jump to the search engine and find that article again. They know they used it in the past, they know the title, and then they get there and it's not there anymore. Another perspective that's challenging with syndication is when the library has to speak to our impact to the institution. So we either have to show that we're spending our money wisely, or the things we're picking are the right things compared to things we're not adding to the collection. So there's good and bad to syndication in that mode as well. One of them is from a user perspective. So if we're doing focus groups or user surveys and they're finding the content they want, however it gets to them, whether it be provided by the publisher or vendor directly as content they created or through syndication, the user doesn't care. So in that sense, we get good satisfaction results when we talk about resources or getting the articles they need or the chapters they need. But there's also there's some challenges that creates. One of them is it gets really murky when you start looking at usage data and you're trying to figure out what's really being used. So, librarians might look, traditionally they would look at a specific journal or an ebook package, and times of budget crisis, it'd be really easy to figure out what needs to be kept, what needs to be cut based on cost per use or number of clicks. In this model, there's a lot of things that are being used, that's being syndicated, that's not really either well represented in the data, or it's not the primary source of that platform. And so you accidentally cut something, and it's maybe some of this other stuff that's being syndicated through these platforms that was the real value to the user, and you don't discover some of that until you've made the cut, and then the faculty member is contacting you, or the department chair, or the student saying, I always use this resource on this platform, and then we often have to show them, well, it's really on this platform because that's where we subscribe to it. This publisher was syndicating it through their platform. We don't use that language, but and we explain to them the source where they can go to get that information. So it also makes it really hard to tell the value of the content to the user or the library administrator or the person that we're preparing our budgets, because the usage gets really murky and muddy, and it's really hard to tell the full value of a specific resource or article or journal, because it's being used in multiple places, and you really can't pull that data together in a way that you can tell the true story. Telling that story also leads more into the money side of things, and also the library's investment, but also what the library world believes in, or what your specific institution might believe in terms of your principles. And so it plays out in several ways. One of them, from the user perspective, is they see a lot of efficiencies. So for you to serve your users' need, you're speeding up their research, you're making it easier to find things. So from an efficiency perspective, the syndication is clearly accomplishing that. The impact to the individual is also very strong, because they're getting the information they need without jumping into multiple platforms or websites. It's all in one spot. So they're from a single user perspective, as long as that resource is always there that they use, and they don't know what the perspective is that it's being syndicated, but that it's always there, you're meeting their needs. What the challenge is on the backside, though, is users are using the syndicated content that maybe the library is not really endorsing. It's just on the platform. So it's not the content that subject librarian may have created for that discipline or that topic. It's just more extra or optional materials that now are available on these platforms. And so it's maybe not always the focused content or the best content for our institution or our discipline or for that course, but it's available, and because it's syndicated well, that's what the users are finding over maybe something that the librarians had curated that really met the curriculum or the strategic objectives of the institution. And in the area of syndication, there's still a lot of areas that there's some lacks of industry standards still. There's some, but there's still areas where there's challenges between platforms or metadata, like I mentioned earlier. Authentication just constantly is a problem, no matter what solutions get rolled out. And then the other area is, even though it's efficient for the user and they're probably getting what they need, there's still just an inconsistency in the user experience that they see. So, if, for example, in an information literacy course, a librarian demonstrates something, the user goes and does it later, it could be a very different experience. Or if they've done that research and they found those things and they're being syndicated, they go back a week or two later. Again, it could be very different from time to time. So they do find there could be a lot of challenges in that space where it's just inconsistent from experience to experience for the user.
Great, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Judd. So my contribution here is coming at it from sort of a standards and shared technology perspective. What underlying capabilities do we need to fuel today's content syndication arrangements, but also how do we see that carrying forward into the future as we sail into the wind? You both touched on sort of various elements of that standardization question. I've listed here a few points. I'm sure there is more. This is not meant to be a comprehensive list. And we have a bit of time at the end for Q&A, where I'd invite and love to hear from all of you about other facets around standards and shared technology that is needed to fuel content syndication, not only today, but also in the future. But a few areas that you spoke about already. There's the access part, the entitlement part. There's research integrity, of course, important throughout academic publishing, but also very much in the case of content syndication. How do we make sure that signals that have to deal with research integrity and that speak to the trust and authority of a specific piece of content, for example, if a work has been retracted or there's been an update, how do we make sure that that propagates through all these points of discovery and of delivery in a syndicated content type of world? Usage data, you spoke about that already. The need to have a comprehensive view of how much of the content is utilized as a proxy for the value that's been delivered. And of course, the area around content provisioning, Judd already touched upon that. How do we make sure that the content is fit for purpose to be used in other contexts? So I wanted to talk about a couple of projects and initiatives that I am involved with that address some of these common components today, and also how we see that role could evolve into the future. And I wanted to start with Seamless Access, which is a not-for-profit initiative that is run by NISO, Internet2, Géant, and STM, really focusing on the access side of things. So the mission for Seamless Access, it's designed to foster a better, more streamlined online access experience when using all sorts of scholarly resources, including content, articles, monographs, etc. And of course, usability is an important aspect, but so is security, privacy. So Seamless Access really builds upon federated authentication and adds a couple of layers of usability improvement to that. I sometimes joke that federated authentication is built by, designed for, and used by system architects. Very powerful, but not very easy to use out of the box. So there's a couple of usability layers that Seamless Access is adding on top of that infrastructure. The first, as you see on the picture here to your right, is a consistent, recognizable UI that prompts the user to go through the access experience. There's the logo, the icon, and the call to action, access through your institution. That's the same button that you will see on many websites that are integrated with Seamless Access, for example, Science Direct being one of them. And of course, the idea is by making that button recognizable and ensuring that it works and it's reliable, that builds not only recognition, but also trust in that experience. The second element of Seamless Access is an ability to remember the user's choice of institute across participating websites, so across platforms that integrate with Seamless Access. So if you have gone through the process to identify your home institute and gone through the authentication journey once, in this example that could be Surf, then next time if you hit the platform of a participating website, the button will change from the more generic call to action, access through your institution, to the more specific one, access through Surf, which adds again to the recognizability and the trust. And the strength of doing this as a common infrastructure is, of course, that network effect, that choice of institute is remembered not only on that individual website, but across all participating websites. Very powerful mechanism. The third value element that Seamless Access brings to the table is what's called an IDP discovery service. IDP is short for identity provider. This is also sometimes called the WAVE, or where are you from screen. Basically an ability for the user to find their home institution from a list that could be very long. The full list is something like 30,000 entries, I believe. And this is all coming from metadata from the Géant backbone. So this is not just your usual drop-down of 5 social logins where just a drop-down is going to cut it. You really need to think very hard about the user experience and usability elements of this kind of service for the user to find their home institution from a potentially very, very long list. So within Seamless Access, we've done a lot of user research to really optimize for a best-in-class user experience. And of course, once the user has gone through that process and selected their home institute, then they are brought to the login screen, they can authenticate, and that choice is remembered so that next time you log in and that information is still persisted, so you haven't cleared cookies, etc., then you don't need to do it again because the choice is remembered. Switching gears a little bit, the other initiative that I wanted to talk about that is relevant in this context is Get FTR, which is short for Get Full Text Research. And whereas Seamless Access is really focusing on the access experience, Get FTR operates a little bit earlier in the user journey, in the workflow, really at the point of discovery, and aiming to bring users from the point where they discover content as relevant to them to the point of access as easily and as seamlessly as possible. And sort of the origin story here is that about 5-6 years ago, we did quite a bit of user research and identified that even if researchers have access to a particular piece of content, it can be very difficult and cumbersome for them to get to that point of access. And I'll speak a little bit in the next 2 slides about how GetFTR does that, how that addresses that problem specifically. But just to mention here, 5 years onwards, GetFTR has really developed into a piece of scholarly infrastructure, moving from an individual solution to really an ingrained piece of infrastructure. Over 70 integrations with publishers, discovery services, AI companies, content syndication platforms, covering about 70% of newly published articles and also supporting multiple use cases at this point in time. So what does that look like more specifically? You see that here illustrated on the right, where you see the little button with the Get FTR indicator that signals to the user that they will have access to this material at the point of discovery, so before they even click on the link. So what this does is sort of take away that click and pray uncertainty, that anxiety that researchers face if they see a link and they have no idea if it's going to work. If you see the indicator, you can be sure that the link is going to work for you. And then if you click on the link, you benefit from what we call a Get FTR Smart Link that takes you most of the time with 1 click to the PDF, assuming you are already authenticated. The indicator spans both open access and subscription content, so all of that is included in the index. And we have a whole bunch of different integration use cases, discovery service, but also reference lists, publishing platforms, because that is a source of discovery as well, syndication platforms, etc. And we've also launched a browser extension, so most of the utilization is realized through direct integrations with third-party discovery services, but there's also a browser extension that users can install themselves. So a bit more than a year ago, almost 2 years ago, I think by now, we broadened the scope of GetFTR a bit from just signposting that access to also signaling other aspects that are relevant to the user at the point of discovery, other aspects about the content. And specifically here, I'm talking about research integrity provisions, namely if a piece of content has been retracted or has had material updates since publication. So on the screenshot on the right, you see that alongside the GetFTR access indicator, we also surface indicators that show that the work has now been retracted. And again, this happens at the point of discovery, so even before the user has clicked on the link, which I think is a pretty powerful moment in the user journey to showcase that information. And of course, the problem that this aims to solve is helping to ensure that research don't inadvertently stumble upon and use outdated or false information that has been shown to be inaccurate or not produced according to the standards of ethics and integrity that you might expect. We're working on sort of a next installment of this type of capability. So this is showing that retraction signaling at the point of discovery, at the click. We're also exploring, prototyping a solution that repositories and content syndication platforms could use as a subscriber to have a feed delivered to them that alerts them of articles being retracted or being updated. The underlying data is coming from Crossref, but Crossref offers an API that you need to pull, so you need to go there and check the API at regular intervals. This would change that much more to a push-based kind of service that you can be notified when there are material changes to the content that you have on your platform. Usage data, we spoke about that, or it has been referenced by my previous speakers before. Brian, as you said, I think there's a pretty common need, especially as content becomes distributed over different platforms, different content syndication platforms, but for OA it could be, of course, a lot of different places. There is still a need by many stakeholder systems to have a consistent, cohesive view on the usage of that content as a proxy for the value that is delivered by that material. And now with content being surfaced and available in different places, that is no longer straightforward. When the content is on a single website, it's easy, but if it's not, it becomes much more complicated. And in particular, the underlying challenge is there that many different platforms use different schemas, different taxonomies for the organizational identifier. So if you want to aggregate it, that becomes difficult. If one platform uses, say, ROR and another uses Ringgold or a proprietary organizational identifier schema, that's not easy to aggregate and sum that up. So we've developed a capability with GetFTR that allows the publisher to pass through the specific organizational identifiers that they do to a content syndication platform. And this is instrumented on ScienceDirect, for example. So that makes it much easier for usage data to be aggregated, because now suddenly you can aggregate on the basis of the same organizational identifiers and not, you don't suffer from those, from the mismatch in the organizational identifier schemas. So a capability that's being deployed, it's available on ScienceDirect and being put to use now. Very much complementary to a recent update by the Counter best practice on how to deal with aggregated usage data. So this works hand in glove with that update. This is all still supporting the current paradigm of content discovery. If we look ahead at sort of that future paradigm where AI is likely to play a much bigger role, of course, this opens up new sets of questions. In particular, do we need some kind of metric that is maybe similar or akin to what the Counter metric does today, but then for content usage by AI systems, where the value is not only in the material that is being surfaced to the user in a presentation layer, but also all the content that is being used behind the scenes in the machinery. So wrapping up my bit of the contribution today, so I spoke about a couple of standards or areas where I think, or we feel there is good use for common technology and standardization. I didn't talk a lot about content provisioning. Judd, you mentioned it in your presentation a bit. I did just want to do a shout out real quick. There's some interesting work happening by the colleagues from Wiley. They published a paper on the Wiley AI Gateway that's quite interesting. And there is some work underway from NISO, who are spinning up a working group to also look at content provisioning, coming from a series of workshops that they held around artificial intelligence. We're also exploring a possible role for GetFTR in that space, but that is still relatively early days. With that, thank you very much. And I think we have a little bit of time for questions. So let me open it up to the audience and see if people have questions or comments for Judd, Brian, or myself. Thank you.